So this work comes from a postdoc that I carried out at the University of Copenhagen that's kind of on its tail end. And I'm also an assistant professor at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, and I've been there for about a year, so it is a new position. It's titled, Where Can We Go to Escape It? Pyropolitics in Mato Grosso. And I'd like to give a little bit of a background about how the project was inspired and the larger project that this postdoc is embedded in. So I'll start with that in the first maybe 7 minutes or so, and then I'll go into the background of my project itself. So this talk was inspired by the Day of Fire, which was August 2019. And Brazil's National Institute of Space Research and NASA documented more than 72,000 fires across the Amazon basin in Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil. And smoke darkened the skies all the way to Sao Paulo, and people came out and protested across major Brazilian cities. And both national and international media became alarmed. They depicted the fire as a result of then President Bolsonaro's irresponsible colonization policies in Brazil. And according to the BBC, this August 10th Dia de Fogo is a key moment in the recent history of the Amazon basin. Rural producers along the route BR-163 in Paraná actually colluded to set the forest on fire, and these were criminal fires that in the end haven't been able to be prosecuted, and they are still impune. As the events evolved, experts on the fire in Amazon expressed longstanding concerns about the impending ecological collapse of the Amazon. And these international condemnations highlighted the lack of an appropriate political response to the fires. And this created really ripe grounds for debates about the climatic, the economic, or the political factors, and about who was to blame, which I'm going to pick up in my presentation. French President Macron was at the forefront of the international condemnation, and he tried to juggle his conflicting considerations of the Paris Agreement with trade agreements that were laid down in the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, which ended up kind of being put on the back burner and just recently this year has been taken up again. So this Day of Fire came to visibilize a growing process of political polarization in Brazil. Bolsonaro distanced the country from their trading partners and other South American nations who reached out to offer support, including President of Chile, where I am located, and refused kind of support to combat the fires or to try to save the trade agreement. And it accumulated later, this kind of polarization, when angry supporters of President Bolsonaro, backed financially by the powerful soy sector, stormed the Congress in Brasilia to protest the election of Lula as the country's new president a few years ago. So in the context of that Day of Fire and the polarization, the project question looks at the fires by zooming into them in different parts of the basin and asking about how fire becomes an actant in political changes. You can see the storming of the Congress. And we looked at the scope of traveling with fire to the many places where it unsettled and affected politics. We proposed that it reveals the political after effects of this fire event. And we have a paper coming out with the lead author on this of differentiation, politicization, and polarization as effect of the fires. We are looking at this from a theoretical standpoint of pyrosocial relations, which is being developed in dialogue with different people in the team. So we build upon political ecology and disaster studies. These often seek to understand and reveal the underlying political, economic, the powerful causes of ecological events. But in this research, we're trying to reverse the relationship to understand how ecological events, and fire specifically, cause and impact politics. So instead of political ecology, maybe we're doing ecological politics or more than human politics. And with pyrosociality, scholars have examined fire governance and its political social impacts, how fire shapes things like territory, for example. And we consider the role of fire as a non-human actant in political culture more broadly, following Latin American scholars like Viveros de Castro, de la Cadena, Tola, who have taken an interest in the role of more than human actors in the political arena. And in Brazil, there's a lot of literature on the polarization of the political culture. And we're looking at this creation of the two sharply opposed political tendencies that are pitted against each other in ideological terms, looking at their radically different visions for the future of society. So the title of the research project is Fire and Political Alterity in the Amazon. And with this concept of alterity, we're looking at it both as a political alterity that captures material alterations, the transformations on the ground, and the making of new alterities, so difference, otherness, and conflict, as an effect of the agency of fire. So we're looking at political alterity in the project as like an intense kind of pyrosociality that's characterized by this difference, politicization, and political opposition. That's a little bit of the theoretical background. And looking at the different projects that make up the fire and political alterity in the Amazon, we have joint fieldwork in various sites on the agro-industrial frontier, where fire is involved in processes of land grabbing, deforestation, and forest degradation, as well as in indigenous practices of swidden cultivation. So we have a PhD student, Felipe Roa, who's looking at Mennonite settlements and fire in the Beni region of Bolivia. Nehemias Pino is looking at the Napo Valley in Ecuador of chakra farms and how fire is absent from the conceptualization of this. We do have one case outside of Chile where Fernanda Gallego is looking at pyropolitics and property speculation after fires in central Chile. And then our two more senior scholars, Soren Valkov, who's been working over 35 years or maybe even 40 years in Peru on land titling and indigenous land titling and fire. And the lead scholar, Stine Kroja, is looking at satellites and monitoring and seeing how fire is conceived from above. And I'm the one who's kind of her mirror on the ground, talking to farmers and producers in Mato Grosso. And Stine and I also accompanied each other in different parts of our research, so I will mention her a little bit in my talk. So my piece of the puzzle is examining the relationship between soy production, the rural sector, and fires. And I focus on this relationship through the lens of certified farming, because certified farming is a way that attempts to address the problem. So it's of particular relevance to countries attempting to mitigate climate change footprints, and they're trying to buy products that aren't linked to deforestation, forest degradation, or fire. This project is funded by the Independent Research Fund of Denmark. And Denmark, for example, decided to purchase soy credits through the Roundtable of Responsible Soy, through producers who abide by the soy moratorium, which is basically a way of attempting to buy soy that is greener than conventional soy. And now they are also, as a member of the EU, part of the EU deforestation regulation, which has been kind of stretched out and eventually it will be applied. It was supposed to be in order a few years ago, but they've kind of found problems and have been renegotiating, as it is kind of a tense area of trying to impose EU regulations on the countries that they are exporting. So this process basically is trying to legalize deforestation-free soy through supply chain transparency. And so in their words, the regulation seeks to reduce EU countries from the risk of being exposed to deforestation. And I chose Mato Grosso in particular to look at this dynamic because it's the largest soy producing region in Brazil. If Mato Grosso were a country, it would be ranked number 4 in soy production in the world on its own. So let's get a little bit of background on the fieldwork itself. I went to Brazil during 2 fire seasons. My first fieldwork in September, October 2023, we interviewed soy traders, sustainability representatives, certifiers, auditors in Brasilia, Sao Paulo, and Cuiabá. And I also spent time with members of Brazil's ultra-conservative soy farm union on their version of certified soy to understand how they saw fires, what they opined about the policies, who's responsible for fires and deforestation in their viewpoint. And then we also did a transect where we traveled just under 500 miles from the capital city of Cuiabá up to the colony town of Alta Floresta. This is on the soy frontier in northern Mato Grosso, and we wanted to visualize the Amazonian landscape. And as you can see from the photo, most of the Amazon along this two-way highway route BR-163, which is where the Geo de Fogo took place, is just soy farms. There's really not much forest left. So in Alta Floresta, I interviewed an NGO working with the Amazon Fund and USAID, and they have projects to support family farmers through a group certification to certify organic production. So I returned to Alta Floresta in October, November 2024. And here I focused on the smallholders' experiences of fire in the context of the soy frontier. And there's a change of cattle ranching to soy farming that's taking place in the area. While I was there, the city had absolutely no water. The NGO director said, quote, "No one makes the link between deforestation, fires, and the current lack of water." And you'd think that this was very obvious. So kind of looking into the background of why this was true is the inspiration for my talk today. Local politicians there are either right-wing or far right-wing. The far right-wing Bolsonaro-backed candidate tried to smear like the right-wing candidate as being an ambientalista, being like pro-environment. So there is kind of this idea about protecting the environment is something that isn't worth it politically in this area. So along with the ethnographic interviews I did with different families who participate in the certification scheme, Stina and I did a second transect along BR-163 again, this time from Alta Floresta all the way up to Santarém in Pará. So we followed the soy up to the confluence of the Amazon River there. So you can see kind of from, there's a yellow star that says Brazil, that's where Alta Floresta is. And then we went all the way up to where it says Ponta de Moreta, which is about another, I don't know, 800 miles. So we did a whole transect of 1,200 miles in the course of our fieldwork, and in this way we could trace the route of soy as it goes from northern Mato Grosso out to the Amazon. So let's get into some of my findings. This talk is the first. I'm really appreciative for the opportunity because it's the first time I'm kind of systematizing and looking at this data as I explore it. So I'm really happy to do that with you in our discussion. There's not as much theorizing. It's more like these are the results and this is what I think is happening. So I'm really looking forward to your feedback. So despite this public outcry about the Geo de Fogo in 2019, fire persists, right? This was like on TV the second week I got into Alta Floresta, that from 2005 up until 2004, we've just had a steady increase of fires. And I want to start this section presenting and looking at part of the 2024 transect that we did, or that big road trip. This is near the Tapajós Park Reserve. and it's really close to where the 2019 burns took place. It's a few meters off of the highway, and right next to it is the soy farm. The area is still smoldering when we arrived, and you can see there's a fence post, and then at the bottom of the fence post is a bottle, and that's just fire accelerant. It's either like gasoline or alcohol. So this is very clearly an intentional fire, and they really didn't care to leave behind just complete evidence. It looks like I set it up, but like it's, I mean, there's just no consciousness or need really to hide evidence. And we're going to get into why it doesn't matter. You don't need to hide evidence as part of in my talk. So in the news, these are often called wildfires. But um, as we can see here with the fence post, the accelerant, and we'll talk about property as well in a bit, these are not wildfires. Fires are burned during the dry season. Scientific consensus says that naturally caused fires like lightning strikes, um, burns that are like refracted through a glass bottle or like off of an aluminum can are incredibly minuscule. It's like less than 1% of burns in this area of the Amazon are caused by not like natural non-human actors. And so these are intentional fires. They are lit by people, and as such, they're criminal fires, but they're not called that in the news. And so on the ground, people are living within the reality of these ever increasing fires, but they're hearing on the news wildfires, wildfires, right? So I want to explore why people came to see these wildfires, which are criminal fires, as inevitable, unavoidable, and they really have very little hope to change the situation. So let's listen to some of the findings in their words. So in 2024, in October, I was visiting a house in Novo Bandirantes, which is a small colony town in northern Mato Grosso. It's a mix of unpaved roads and then some more urban housing that quickly gives way to plots of land with gardens and crops. And it's just outside of the city, and a large fire had burned 2 weeks before my visit. I sat at the table with a young married couple and their parents, and I asked what the burning season was like that year. And everyone spoke at once. So this all came at the same time. It was horrible this year. We couldn't see the sky. Meu Jesus do céu, santo Deus. There was smoke for 60 days, all the way to Cuiabá. And after these kind of crossed exclamations died down, the daughter said that some days it was so bad that they couldn't even see the crops right next to their house. In another house, we sat in a table outside in her lush garden, and one of the women explained, just 2 weeks ago, it was so horrible, I couldn't be able to see you here face to face. You couldn't breathe, faltaba air. In Nova Bondirantes in August, everything was out of control, they said. There was so much dust and we had dry throats. We thought our neighbor's property was going to burn and the fire was so close. Wild animals, los bichos, came into the city looking for water. It's like being in the fire because the wind brings the smoke here. And later she considered the health costs, saying everybody was sick with respiratory issues. So these smoky effects of fire repeated in other colony towns I visited, like Nova Monteverde, Apiacás, Paranaíta. One woman exclaimed, I've never seen it so bad before. Everywhere you looked, here in Alta Floresta, in Sinop, there was thick smoke everywhere. My well dried up, and I have another, but the water is full of mud. And I don't like to water my crops with water and dirt in it. You need to be careful because it could hurt the plants. My reservoir dried up, and all the fish died. We'll walk over and you'll see. She said it was so smoky you couldn't see past the banana patch, and I know people who took a plane from Sao Paulo to Sinop, and the plane had to return because it couldn't land from the smoke. It was impossible to escape it. You might run from the fire, but not from the smoke. You remember the day of fire, she asked? That wasn't general, that wasn't everywhere. This was everywhere. So when I asked about how people took care of themselves, most people looked at me in surprise, which also surprised me. And this is where the title of the talk comes from. One woman asked, well, where can we go to escape it? Another said, if my son was visiting with his car, I would have begged him to drive and drive and drive and get me out of this. And I thought about where I could go to escape it, but all of Brazil was burning. You couldn't get out of it. Out of like the 25 families I interviewed, only 2 said that they used a humidifier at night. And one of the women said that she was so desperate to stop breathing in the smoke that she wet down bandanas to filter it out, but she just felt like she was suffocating. So even the plants were smaller this year, one man said, because of the smoke, and they couldn't. They they just had a runt crop, basically, is what they said. So let's then kind of that sets up our kind of new normal of how people are having to deal with smoke despite it being years after the day of fire, it's still continuing to burn. Let's look at some of the ways that they propose to fight or to prevent fire. So you can see this beautiful family farm with pineapples. They also grow bananas and coffee, which used to be a premier crop. This was like one of the main coffee growing areas of Brazil. The woman I interviewed was also a nurse for the local municipality in Mutum, and she'd said that they'd had over 60 days of fumaça, of smoke, and she'd spent the whole time with a cold and a dripping nose. And they'd gone for 4 months without rain, and their plants even had sunburn, she said. When her husband arrived back from the field, he added that about 10 to 11 years ago, the whole forest had burned a few kilometers from their farm, and it jumped at different places because of the wind. After he left to continue to go do some chores, she quietly shared that he'd recently been in the hospital for smoke inhalation. Um, a neighbor was clearing their field and gathering hay, and it got out of control, and there was so much smoke, they all went to help. And she told me he was on his tractor to fire a fire break, and the winds changed, and everything caught fire, and he almost died. They managed to get him out, and he spent 2 weeks in recovery. But regarding the smoke inhalation in general, she explained that there was a campaign nationally to address smoke inhalation as a public health concern, but Bolsonaro had canceled it when it was ready to launch. So there are also campaigns for fire prevention. In northern Mato Grosso, fighting fire consists of the trained firefighters from Alta Floresta, from the big town nearby. But most small municipalities don't have enough money or personnel. And they have trainings to make like a fire brigade with local men. And you're taught how to use they call it the mosquito, which you can see here. It's also used to spray chemicals. That's what the local people are trained to use in order to fight fires. You can see it's not that many liters and it can run out very quickly. So of course, most of the farmers underline that it's not enough. And with people who have undergone the direct burning of their land, one woman, for example, said that it took 10 days to put the fire out, and that only 5 firefighters arrived from Alta Floresta to fight the fire. And they were really lucky because the water truck, the pipa de agua, arrived, and the municipality had paid for a driver, but he was at work at a different job, and he agreed to leave it and to go and to drive the water truck, and they were able to pump water up from the river. They also did a back burn to try and mitigate the big burn, and turned on their irrigation system, but the irrigation system had already burned, so it was too late for that. And she said all of their feet were blistered and burned from the soil being so hot when they were trying to fight the fire. Now, if your neighbor's property burns and then the winds carry it to your area, it causes a lot of like community disputes. A single mom in Paranaíta told me that a neighbor had burned his property to clear it because he wanted to rent it out. And in the community, they had all said that they had needed to be careful, but he burned at night. He didn't respect it at all. And the wind blew in and it burned all of her banana crops. So she had 60 boxes of organic bananas that she was supposed to move to market, and she wasn't able to fulfill any of her orders. And she had to go and denounce him and go to the local delegation so that she wouldn't receive a fine for burning her land. So, to look at this last little part of prevention, returning to the pineapple farm, I asked how the fires could be prevented from the gentleman who had spent the 2 weeks in the hospital. And he said, fires come from too much ambition. People do whatever's cheaper to clear. So they use fire, machines, chemicals, but all of that is only cheap in the short term. So I want to look at how they see not just fighting fire, but how this can be prevented. And part of prevention also includes identifying best strategies as to who to address to stop the fires and how to address it. And in the news and in protests, you see signs saying O agro é fogo. This is a sign hanging in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. This roughly means like ag or agriculture is fire. So how do smallholders see themselves in relation to O agro, to ag? In my interviews, I told family farmers that I'd seen over and over, like that O agro was in the news, and I asked them to explain to me, a foreigner, what O agro means, because I had seen it to address kind of a lot of different aspects of agricultural production. So across the countryside, from large-holder soy farms and their workers, family farmers, and even people just running errands in town, I also saw everyone wearing these like long sleeve work shirts that you see a picture of here, that have tractors, the Brazilian flag, kind of mechanized planters, all of this signaling, again, like O agro and national pride. So I wondered if family farmers saw themselves as part of O agro, or if they saw that there's any kind of difference in there. O agro also can refer to the agricultural sector, like the political sector, which is called bancada rural in Brazil. That's the political arm of rural politicians in Congress. And they say O agro feeds Brazil. This is, of course, never mind that 70% of soybean production is exported and it's used for animal feed. So in and to think of like O agro as well, one of the NGO members in Alta Floresta that I interviewed said that the Bancada Rural is known for the 3 B's, which is Biblia, Bala, e Bois, which is Bible, bullet, and bull. Well, it's ox, but to keep with the 3B alliteration. So there's this kind of very strong frontier or cowboy identity that's articulated in the music people listen to and how they dress, and how they see themselves as being producers of food. This is similar to, I think Jeffrey Hoelle had, I think that's how you pronounce it, Hoelle, has a book called Rainforest Cowboys. So there's like a cowboy culture there that crosses over the class differences in the area. And so in asking them about, are they agro, are they part of the agro that's at fault for burning or not? And there's an overall sense from the smallholder farmers that I interviewed that everybody burns. So one said, it comes down to individual responsibility. You flick a match, you burn your trash, it gets out of control. Everybody burns. Sometimes even you see somebody burning and you say, oh, they're burning and they're putting up smoke. Well, I'm going to do the same thing so that everybody's burning at the same time and it's kind of concentrated into the same time period of the most smokiness, and then another day then they won't burn. And I think, as the NGO director noted, there's a change in the kind of rainforest landscape where you could burn and it would go out, and the current landscape, which is a flammable landscape that has been, over the years, uh, changed the way that fire acts in the landscape through deforestation and drought. So one of the smallholder farmers told me the majority of people burn and they don't feel like they're going to get affected. And when I asked about the kind of rural elites, the fazenderos, they said, well, the local politicians and fazenderos should be in charge to help, but they get off scot-free. So they can buy a fazenda when it's already burned. And these normally come with a fine and an embargo, but they don't pay the half of it and they get around it. And this is the classical Brazilian phrase, tem jeito, like they have a way to get out of it. She said people set fires and then someone sets another and another because it's already burning. And she says agro is responsible because they burn pasture like the big fazenderos. But there's a general feeling that those big farms get away without fines and the embargoes don't work. So the woman whose farm burned, she explained that property owners put in like a laranja, who's kind of like a fall guy. It literally means orange in Portuguese. So the fall guy takes the fines and they can't embargo it because they can't find the property owner. And then there's also an issue of who can use machinery and who can't within this differentiation of o agro. The municipality receives funding to buy machinery, and the machinery is supposed to support family agriculture. But there was this big backhoe on her property, and she said, this has been here for months. They get the money to support family farms, they buy the machinery, but they don't actually use it, and they ask us to help with diesel. They just bring it to my property and ask me to sign, and then nothing happens. In my opinion, when big pockets aren't affected, then nothing will change, she said. Finally, there was one woman who recounted fighting a burn that started on a fazenda and it spread to her father's lot. And he was fined and his lot was embargoed. He has since passed away, and then she inherited the lot, but the fine and the embargo passed down to his descendants. Even though they live in a different town and they weren't responsible for burning it, the land is basically useless to them. And it pushed them to rent it out uh, because you can rent it and not be responsible for the fine. And finally, some people's answers seem to contradict themselves. When I asked if Oangro was to blame and if family farming or agro was different, it was a very kind of like halted, thoughtful, kind of puzzled conversation that I had with these people about what Oagro was. Sometimes they define themselves as Oagro as being people who are hardworking, who feed the country. A lot of the smallholder farmers are colonists from southern Brazil. So they identify with the same cultural and political values as the agricultural industry. And I think what's happening is that the class differences are subsumed by this cultural identity. So big ag is claiming to represent the values of the small family farmers. And then you also, as family farmers, kind of end up blaming yourself for setting fires because you see yourself as being ag as well. And so I think that this kind of alignment of agriculturalists who are different classes, but see themselves as culturally similar, politically similar. And this isn't in this part of in this presentation, but also religion can be included here. So I think in a way, what I'm seeing is a suppression of political alterity. So just a little bit to conclude, returning to this first burn with an evidence that it's a criminal burn, this land could still be exploited and rented through a laranja with little consequence because you actually have to catch the person in flagrante to prosecute them for these burns. So fazenderos are often absentee landowners as well, so it's hard to catch them to embargo the land. The 6 weeks that the city went without water, as you can see in with the yellow rails, that entire, it's about a kilometer, is the city reservoir that was completely dry. Um, the mayor managed to fill it back up by asking the fazenderos to empty their private reservoirs and to fill the municipal reservoir back. So there was water, it just was in private reserves. So again, we have this dynamic between deforestation, fires, and the lack of water that makes the rainforest become a flammable landscape. And so largeholder agro has set these conditions for extreme burning seasons, but local fires often reinforced individualized blame, flicking, burning your trash or flicking a cigarette. And I think that because people are continuing with burning practices that were innocuous in an otherwise healthy rainforest, they see themselves as being culpable, even though it's actually the landscape that's changed. Their practices used to be quote unquote sustainable around fire. So I think that this is the smokescreen that is created around how to address fires, and it creates this new normal of living with fire as soy continues to move into the forest, as we can see the trucks here. Thank you very much. We'll see how far I went, a little bit over more than I thought, but I really appreciate you hanging on and listening.